Now that we know a little more about Visual Studio, let's create a more interesting program. What I want to happen is instead of forcing the user to pass in their name as a command line parameter, I want the user to be able to start the program running without any command line parameters, and then the program will prompt the user and ask them to enter their username. So I want to accept user input as the program is running, and this is something that I can do with another method on the console class. This method is console.readLine. So WriteLine puts something onto the screen. ReadLine will allow the user to type characters and then press the return key, and ReadLine will take those characters, put them into a string, and return that string to me. That's what this IntelliSense window is trying to tell me. The return value of calling this console.readLine method is a string. So I will need to take that string and I will need to save it somewhere so that I have access to the user's name later inside of this method. That's when I can declare a variable. C# is a typed language, so I need to have a type for every variable that I define. In this case, the type is string, and the variable is called name. And we'll be talking in a lot more detail about the types of variables that you can have. But for now, you can effectively think of this name variable as holding on to that user input so that I can use it later. Name will be available anywhere else throughout the rest of this method after it's been defined. I want to say console.WriteLine hello and then plus the name. Now, it would probably also be a good idea before I accept that user input to write out something that tells the user they need to input their name. So let's just WriteLine your name and then read the result of that and then echo it back out, hello plus name. Let's try this real quick. I'll do a build just by hitting the shortcut keys, Shift Control V. Let's come out and run the program. I'm just going to type hello this time. It's going to prompt me for my name. I will type in Alan just to try something different, and we get hello Alan. Very good. Let's take this one step further. Let's try to find out if the user had enough sleep last night. We'll just basically ask, how many hours of sleep did you get? And then use some logic to determine if the user is well rested or not. So first, let's do the prompt. I want to WriteLine something and ask the user, how many hours of sleep did you get last night? And now I expect the user to type in a number between, let's say, 0 and 24. And I want to store this value so I can inspect it later and figure out if the user got enough sleep to be rested. So because I expect the user to type in a number, I'm going to this time declare a variable as type int, which is short for integer. This will be a variable that can store a number, hours of sleep, which would be a common naming convention for a C# variable. Variables that you define inside of a method, they always start with a lowercase letter. If they contain multiple words in that name, then you uppercase the letters of those words. That's a little bit different from class names, which always start with an uppercase letter, and method names, which always start with an uppercase letter. So now I have this integer variable, hours of sleep, that can store the amount of sleep that a user has. Let's try to do another console.readLine to allow the user to input this value. And you'll notice that I get a red squiggly inside of Visual Studio. If I hover over that line, I will see the problem here, the error message. It says it cannot implicitly convert type string to int. So C# is a typed language, and not all variables are compatible if you try to assign something like a string to an integer. Console.readLine returns a string, a sequence of characters. It could be anything like ABC. How can you possibly take that value and put it into a variable that holds a number? That's something that the C# compiler and the runtime just won't do for me automatically. I have to do some explicit conversion. I need to take this string and turn it into an integer. That's something that I can do by invoking a method on int. It's a method called parse. You pass in a string, and parse will try to take that string and turn it into an integer value. So the user types in the characters 1, 2, int.parse will turn that into the number 12. The user could also type in the characters ABC, and int.parse is going to throw an exception and crash the program because it cannot convert ABC into a number. We'll talk about how to deal with that type of scenario later in the course. For right now, we'll assume that the user is a good user. They always type in numbers. And now I can make a determination if the user has enough sleep or not. Let's say that if the user has more than 8 hours of sleep, that they should be well rested. So we want to write out a message that tells them they should be well rested. Let's do this after we say their name. I want to say console.WriteLine, you are well rested. But remember, I only want to do this if the user had more than 8 hours of sleep. And this is a place where I can use an if statement in C#. If allows me to write an expression that will evaluate to true or false. So if hours of sleep is greater than 8, then do what is inside of these curly braces. So I want to take this console.WriteLine method and cut it and move it inside of that if condition. And now what if the user didn't have more than 8 hours of sleep? Well, then I can use the else keyword. If else logic is very common logic in a C# application. You can say, if you meet some condition, do this. Otherwise, do this other thing. The other thing could be that we could console.WriteLine, you need more sleep. And now we have an application that not only takes some user input, but also branches the execution of the application in different directions depending on that input. And let's just run this with the debugger to see how it works. I'll press F5. We will hit our opening breakpoint here at the beginning of the program. Let me F10 over a couple lines. We hit the read line statement, and Visual Studio is smart enough to switch over to the application and show it because it's expecting some input here. I'll put in my name, which is Scott. I can use the mouse, hover over this, see that name does contain the value Scott. That's good. Now let's get the number of hours of sleep. Let me enter the value 9. Again, I can hover over hours of sleep, see that there is a 9 there. We will right line out the name, and now you can watch this. If hours of sleep is greater than 8, I press F10. Yes, we're going to branch into that condition, and we will right line, you are well rested, and we will skip the else part. So I only get to execute one of those two branches. And let me just flip over to the program. I can see it produced the right output. Hello, Scott, you are well rested. So I will press F5 and allow the application to finish executing. And then the debugger exits and I can go back to editing some source code. And now I encourage you to try out the same program and try it out with different inputs. See what happens if hours of sleep is less than 8. See what happens when the user enters characters for the hours of sleep, something like ABC. See how the program crashes and how it behaves. Try some of these things until you are comfortable with Visual Studio and the debugger, and then you can move on to the next module.